Jake Martinez stepped off the transport ship and looked around. The Kepler Station Educational Complex was huge. It floated in space like a giant wheel, spinning slowly among the stars. Ships from many different worlds docked at its ports. Jake had never seen anything like it. He carried a small bag with his things. Inside his jacket pocket was his new teacher's badge. After 20 years as a Marine drill instructor, Jake was starting a new life. Teaching alien kids was going to be very different from training soldiers. The station's main hall was full of creatures Jake had only seen in pictures. Tall blue beings with 4 arms walked past him. Small furry creatures with big eyes scurried between the larger aliens. A group of lizard-like beings stood near a wall talking in low hisses. "Mr. Martinez?" A woman approached him. She was human, which made Jake feel better. "I'm Amy Chen, the principal here. Welcome to Kepler Station." Amy was shorter than Jake, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. She wore a simple blue uniform with the station's symbol on it. "How was your trip?" she asked. "Long," Jake said. "But I'm ready to start work," Amy smiled. "Good, let me show you around." This place can be confusing at first. They walked through wide hallways filled with young aliens. Jake saw classrooms through open doors. In one room, small blue creatures sat in pools of water while a teacher spoke to them. In another, tall, thin beings with long necks listened to lessons on floating screens. "We have students from 47 different worlds," Amy explained. "Their parents work here as diplomats, traders, or military officers. The kids need education, but each species has different needs." "Different how?" Jake asked. "Some breathe different air. Some need special temperatures. And all of them have different ideas about how children should learn." Amy stopped at a large window that looked out into space. "The hardest part is the social rules. Each species has its own way of showing respect. What's polite for one group might be rude for another." Jake nodded. He understood rules and discipline. "What about humans? How do we fit in?" Amy's face became serious. "Humans are still new here. Most alien species have been in space for thousands of years. They see us as young. Some respect us for our military skills. Others think we're too emotional. Many don't know what to think of us yet." They continued walking. Amy showed Jake the cafeteria, where different sections served food that different species could eat. The library had books and data files in hundreds of languages. The gym had areas for creatures that moved in very different ways. "Your classroom is in Section C," Amy said. "You'll be teaching history and basic science to mixed groups. The students are between 8 and 12 years old in human terms." They stopped at a door marked Classroom C7. Inside, Jake saw desks of different sizes and shapes. Some were normal chairs and tables. Others were pools for water-breathing students. Some were perches for flying creatures. "The hardest group you'll work with are the Velkans," Amy said quietly. "They're the lizard-like beings you saw earlier. They're an old warrior race, very proud. Their children are taught never to show weakness or back down from a fight." "That could be a problem," Jake said. "It has been. Velkan cubs often intimidate students from peaceful species, but we can't discipline them the way we would human children. Their culture won't allow it. If we try, their parents complain to the station command." Jake looked around the classroom. He imagined young creatures trying to learn while being scared of bullies. It reminded him of his worst days in the Marines when recruits were too afraid to ask questions. "What about the Velkan teachers?" he asked. "Professor Kethavar teaches in the room next to yours. He's been here for 5 years. He's smart and knows his subjects well, but he follows Velkan traditions very strictly. He believes that showing strength is more important than being kind." Amy handed Jake a data pad with information about his students. "Your first class starts tomorrow. You'll have 12 students from 6 different species. 3 of them are Velkan cubs." That evening, Jake sat in his small quarters reading about his students. The Velkan cubs came from important families. Zix was the son of Ambassador Thexmore. His file said he was smart but often caused trouble. Other Velkan students looked up to him as a leader. Jake also read about the other species. The Zarkians were insect-like beings who were very smart but easily frightened. The Aquarians lived in water and were gentle but shy. The Floraxians were plant-based creatures who moved slowly but thought deeply about everything. The more Jake read, the more he understood the problem. The peaceful species' children were being scared into silence by the aggressive Velkan cubs. The Velkan teacher couldn't stop it because of his culture's rules. The other teachers were afraid to get involved because they might cause diplomatic problems. Jake had spent his career teaching young people to be strong, But strength without kindness was just bullying. He thought about the scared alien children who couldn't learn properly because they were afraid. It wasn't right. The next morning, Jake put on his teacher's uniform and walked to his classroom. Through the wall, he could hear Professor Kethvar's voice. The Velkin teacher spoke in sharp, commanding tones. Jake heard young voices responding with what sounded like fear. Jake opened his classroom door and saw his students waiting. The 3 Velkin cubs sat in the front, puffed up and proud. Behind them, the other students sat quietly, their eyes down. The Zarkian students clicked nervously. The Aquarian children had made their water tanks as small as possible. "Good morning," Jake said in a calm, clear voice. "I'm Mr. Martinez. I'm here to help you learn." One of the Velkin cubs, Zix, looked Jake up and down. The young lizard's eyes showed no respect. Jake could see this was going to be interesting. The first day of class was just the beginning. 3 weeks had passed since Jake started teaching at Kepler Station. He was getting used to the strange mix of students in his classroom. The Zarkian students were quick learners who asked good questions. The Aquarian children were quiet but thoughtful. The Floraxian students took their time but always gave careful answers. The problem was the Velkin cubs. Zix was the worst of the 3. He would interrupt lessons, make loud comments, and stare down the other students until they looked away. His 2 friends, Vex and Kral, followed his lead in everything. Jake had tried different approaches. He gave Zix extra responsibilities, hoping the young Velkin would feel important enough to behave better. He tried ignoring the bad behavior and praising the good. Nothing worked. If anything, Zix seemed to enjoy the attention. The other students were suffering. Little Pip, one of the Zarkian children, had stopped asking questions completely. The Aquarian twins, Coral and Wave, barely spoke above a whisper. Even the normally confident Floraxian student, Bloom, seemed to shrink when Zix was around. Jake knew he needed help, but he also knew the rules. Humans were guests at this station. They had to be careful not to cause diplomatic problems. Still, watching his students learn to be afraid was breaking Jake's heart. One morning, Jake decided to try something different. He planned a joint lesson with Professor Kethvar's class. Maybe if the Velkin cubs saw their own teacher working with a human, they would show more respect. Professor Kethvar was a tall, green-scaled Velkin with yellow eyes and sharp teeth. He had been teaching for many years and knew a lot about galactic history. He agreed to Jake's idea, though he seemed doubtful it would work. The 2 classes met in the larger assembly room. Professor Kethvar stood at the front, his scales gleaming under the lights. Jake sat to the side, ready to help with questions. "Today we will learn about the Great Galactic Wars," Professor Kethvar announced. His voice was deep and commanding. "These wars shaped the galaxy we live in today." The Velkin teacher began explaining how different species had fought for control of space routes and valuable planets. He talked about brave Velkin warriors who had led important battles. His students listened with pride. "The Velkins were the strongest fighters," Professor Kethvar continued. "Other species needed our protection to survive the wars." Jake noticed the non-Velkin students looking uncomfortable. The way the lesson was told made it sound like only Velkins had been brave or important. Professor Kethvar put up a star map showing old battle sites. "Here, Velkin Admiral Thaxnor won the Battle of Crimson Nebula. His brilliant strategy saved 3 star systems." Zix raised his hand. "What about the humans, Professor? My father says they think they're warriors too." Professor Kethvar's scales flickered, which Jake had learned meant he was thinking. Humans are new to space warfare. They joined the galactic community only recently. Their methods are different from ours. "Different how?" Zix asked. Jake could hear the challenge in the young Velkin's voice. "They rely too much on emotion," Professor Kethvar said carefully. "True warriors control their feelings. They follow tradition and honor." Jake felt his jaw tighten, but he stayed quiet. This was Professor Kethvar's classroom. Zix grinned, showing his sharp young teeth. "So humans aren't real warriors?" "They are learning," Professor Kethvar said. Jake could tell the Velkin teacher was trying to be diplomatic, but Zix wasn't satisfied with that answer. "My father says humans cry when they fight. He says they care too much about weak species that can't protect themselves." Some of the non-Velkin students looked hurt by this comment. Little Pip's antennae drooped. The Aquarian twins moved closer together in their shared tank. Professor Kethvar saw the problem but didn't know how to fix it. In Velkin culture, Zix was showing proper pride in his species. The teacher couldn't criticize that without going against everything he had been taught. Strength takes many forms, Professor Kethver said weakly. Zix sensed his teacher's uncertainty. The young Velkin stood up from his desk, making himself look bigger. But some forms are stronger than others, right? Some species are born to lead, and others are born to follow. Jake watched as fear spread through the non-Velkin students. This was exactly what he had been worried about. Zix was using the lesson to put down the other species. Perhaps we should move on to the next topic, Professor Kethvar suggested. But Zix wasn't done. He looked directly at the Aquarian twins. At least humans try to fight. Some species just hide in their water when there's trouble. Coral, one of the Aquarian twins, made a small sad sound. Her sister Wave put a protective fin around her. Professor Kethvar's scales turned a darker green. Jake could see the Velkin teacher was upset, but cultural rules stopped him from disciplining Zix. In Velkin society, a young warrior showing dominance was natural and good. Zix saw that his teacher wouldn't stop him. The young Velkin became bolder. He turned to face little Pip. An insect should stick to building things, not pretending they can be soldiers. Pip's large eyes filled with tears. His small body began to shake. Zix, Professor Kethvar said quietly, perhaps I should what? Zix interrupted, which made several students gasp. Interrupting a teacher was very rude in most cultures, but Zix didn't care. He was testing his power. The young Velkin let out a low growl. It was a threat sound that made all the non-Velkin students freeze with fear. In the wild, that growl meant a predator was about to attack. Professor Kethvar stepped back. The growl was a serious display of dominance in Velkin culture. According to tradition, it meant Zix was claiming leadership. The teacher couldn't challenge it without starting a dominance fight, which was forbidden in a school setting. Jake watched as his classroom filled with fear. The peaceful species children pressed themselves against their desks, trying to become invisible. The Velkin cubs sat up straighter, proud of their friend's display of power. Zix looked around the room with satisfaction. He had shown everyone who was really in charge. Neither teacher had stopped him. In his mind, this proved that Velkins were the strongest species. Now, Zix said, his voice full of confidence, let's continue the lesson about how Velkins protected everyone else. Jake felt something burning in his chest. It was the same feeling he'd had when he saw bullies picking on weaker recruits in the Marines. He had never been able to stand by and watch the strong hurt the weak. But this was different. This wasn't a human military base. This was an alien school with complex rules about species relationships. Jake was supposed to be a guest here, careful not to cause problems. Still, as he looked at the scared faces of his students, Jake knew he couldn't stay silent much longer. Someone had to protect these children. Someone had to show them that kindness was stronger than cruelty. The question was, would anyone listen to a human? Jake watched Zix enjoy his moment of power. The young Velkin had made it clear that he considered himself the leader of all the students. Professor Kethvar stood frozen, trapped by his own culture's rules about dominance and respect. The room stayed quiet except for little Pip's soft sniffling. The Aquarian twins had made their water tank as small as possible, trying to hide. Even Bloom, the Floraxian student, had pulled her leaves tight against her stem. Zix turned back to Professor Kethvar with a smug look. Should I teach the lesson now, Professor? Since I know more about real strength than anyone else here? This was too much, even for a patient Velkin teacher. Professor Kethvar's scales turned dark red, which meant he was very angry. But he still couldn't act. Challenging a cub who had shown dominance would go against everything Velkins believed about natural leadership. Jake had seen enough. He stood up slowly from his chair at the side of the room. All eyes turned to him. The human teacher was tall and solid, with the straight posture of a former Marine. When he spoke, his voice was calm but carried the weight of absolute authority. Zix, Jake said quietly. Say sorry. The room went completely silent. Not the nervous quiet from before, but the deep silence that comes when something shocking has just happened. No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. Zix stared at Jake with his mouth open, showing his sharp young teeth. His yellow eyes went wide with surprise. No one had ever commanded him to apologize, especially not a human. Professor Kethvar looked like he had been struck by lightning. His scales went from red to a pale green color that Jake had never seen before. The Velkin teacher had never seen anyone from a lesser species give orders to a Velkin cub. "What did you say?" Zix asked, his voice squeaking a little. "I said say sorry," Jake repeated. His voice was still calm, but now everyone could hear the iron underneath. It was the voice of someone who had spent 20 years teaching discipline to young soldiers. "You scared your classmates. You were rude to your teacher. You will apologize for both." Zix's face went through several expressions. First shock, then anger, then confusion. "You can't tell me what to do," he said. But his voice wasn't as confident as before. "You're just a human. My father says humans don't understand strength." Jake took one step forward. It wasn't a threatening move, but it showed he wasn't backing down. "Your father is wrong about humans. But this isn't about species. This is about treating people with respect. Respect is earned through strength," Zix said, repeating what he had been taught. He puffed up his scales to look bigger, the way young Velkins did when they felt threatened. "No," Jake said simply. "Respect is earned by being kind to others, especially those who are smaller or different from you. What you did was not strong. It was weak." The word weak hit Zix like a physical blow. In Velkin culture, being called weak was the worst insult possible. The young cub's scales went bright red with anger. "I am not weak," Zix shouted. "I am Velkin. We are the strongest species in the galaxy." Jake didn't raise his voice. "Being strong means protecting others, not scaring them. It means admitting when you're wrong. Right now you're acting like a bully, and bullies are always weak on the inside." Professor Kethavar made a small sound. Jake looked at the Velkin teacher and saw something surprising in his yellow eyes. It wasn't anger or confusion. It was recognition. The old teacher was beginning to understand something he had never thought about before. "I don't have to listen to you," Zix said. But he sounded less sure than before. "You can't make me apologize." "You're right," Jake agreed. "I can't make you do anything, but I can tell you what kind of person you're choosing to be right now." Jake gestured toward the scared students. "Look at them, Zix, really look. Pip is crying because you made him feel worthless. Coral and Wave are hiding because you threatened them. Bloom is scared to move because you told her she doesn't matter." Zix glanced at the other students, then quickly looked away. For the first time, he seemed to actually see the fear he had caused. "That's not strength," Jake continued. "That's just being mean to people who can't fight back. Any bully can do that. It takes no skill, no courage, no intelligence. It's the easiest thing in the world." "Then what is strength?" Zix asked. The question came out before he could stop it. Jake smiled a little. "Strength is admitting when you're wrong. Strength is protecting people who need help. Strength is making others feel safe, not afraid. Strength is being kind even when no one is watching." The room was still completely quiet. Every student was listening to every word. Even Professor Kethavar seemed frozen by what he was hearing. "Your father might be a great warrior," Jake said. "But if he taught you that scaring others makes you strong, then he was wrong about that. Warriors protect people. They don't hurt them for fun." Zix's scales started to change color, going from red to a confused mix of green and yellow. But Velkins are supposed to be dominant. We're supposed to lead. Leading means taking care of people," Jake explained. "A real leader makes sure everyone feels safe and valued. A real leader apologizes when they make mistakes." Jake looked around the room at all the students. Every species here has something special to offer. Zarkians are incredibly smart. Aquarians are wise and peaceful. Floraxians think about problems in ways no one else can. And yes, Velkins are brave and strong. But none of that matters if we don't treat each other with kindness. Professor Kethavar suddenly spoke up. His voice was quiet and thoughtful. "In all my years of teaching," he said slowly, "I have never thought about strength in this way." Jake turned to the Velkin teacher. "Professor, you're one of the smartest beings I've ever met. Your students respect you because you know so much. But they also fear you because you've taught them that fear and respect are the same thing. They're not." The old Velkin's scales went through several color changes as he thought about this. Finally, he spoke again. "You are saying that I have been wrong?" "I'm saying that maybe there's a better way," Jake said gently. "A way where all the students can learn without being afraid." The room waited. Zix looked back and forth between his teacher and the human. The other students watched with wide eyes. Something important was happening, even if they didn't fully understand what it was. Professor Kethavar's scales finally settled on a deep blue color that Jake had never seen before. The Velkin teacher's voice was very quiet when he spoke. "Perhaps," he said carefully. "The human teacher is right. Perhaps I have confused fear with respect, perhaps Perhaps I should be the first to apologize. Professor Kethavar's words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Every student in the room stared at their Velkan teacher with shock. In their entire lives, none of them had ever heard a Velkan adult say they might be wrong. The professor's scales had turned a deep blue color that meant deep thought and sadness in Velkan culture. His yellow eyes looked around the classroom, really seeing his students for perhaps the first time. I have been teaching for 37 years, Professor Kethavar said slowly. I have always believed that strength comes from dominance, that respect must be earned through fear. I taught my students to never show weakness, never admit mistakes, never bow to others. He looked directly at little Pip, whose large insect eyes were still wet with tears. But looking at you now, young Zarkian, I see that my teaching has caused pain. Not strength, not respect, just pain. Zix's mouth fell open. His teacher was admitting weakness in front of everyone. In Velkan culture, this should have been impossible. Leaders never showed doubt. Warriors never admitted mistakes. But Professor Kethavar continued speaking. Jake Martinez has shown me something I never understood before. True strength is not about making others afraid. It is about making others feel safe. The Velkan teacher walked over to Pip's desk. The little Zarkian student shrank back, expecting more harsh words. Instead, Professor Kethavar knelt down so he was at Pip's level. Young Pip, the professor said gently, I am sorry. I am sorry for teaching lessons that made you feel small and worthless. I am sorry for allowing behavior that scared you. You are intelligent and valuable, and I should have protected you. Pip's antennae quivered with surprise. You're apologizing to me, Professor? Yes, Professor Kethavar said simply. I was wrong, and you deserved better from me. The professor stood and turned to the Aquarian twins. Coral and Wave, I apologize to you as well. Your peaceful nature is not weakness. It is wisdom. I should have celebrated your gentleness, not allowed others to mock it. Coral and Wave exchanged looks of wonder. No adult had ever apologized to them before, especially not a Velkan. Professor Kethavar moved to Bloom, the Floraxian student. Bloom, your thoughtful way of considering problems is a gift. I was wrong to let anyone suggest that being different makes you less valuable. Finally, the professor looked at his own Velkan students. Zix, Vex, Kral, I have failed you most of all. I taught you that bullying others would make you strong. I was wrong. I have made you weak by teaching you to fear kindness. Zix looked like his entire world was falling apart. Everything he had been taught about strength and leadership was crumbling. But Professor, he said in a small voice, if we're not supposed to dominate others, how do we lead? Jake stepped forward. You lead by example, Zix. You lead by protecting those who need protection. You lead by admitting when you're wrong and learning from your mistakes. But my father says, Zix started. Your father is a diplomat, Jake interrupted gently. His job is to make deals and agreements with other species. Do you think he does that by scaring them, or by earning their respect through fairness and honesty? Zix thought about this. He had seen his father work with aliens from many different worlds. Ambassador Thexmore was respected throughout the galaxy, but not because he was frightening. People trusted him because he kept his word and treated everyone fairly. I never thought about it that way, Zix admitted. Professor Kethavar nodded. Neither did I, young one. I confused the strength needed for war with the strength needed for peace. They are very different things. The old teacher turned to face all his students. I want to make a promise to all of you. From now on, this classroom will be a place where everyone feels safe to learn and ask questions. No one will be mocked for being different. No one will be threatened for showing curiosity. But Professor, Vex, one of the other Velkan cubs, asked nervously, what will our parents say? They expect us to show dominance. Professor Kethavar's scales flickered as he considered this. I will speak with your parents. I will explain that true dominance comes from being so confident in yourself that you don't need to tear others down. A truly dominant leader lifts others up. Jake watched this conversation with amazement. In just a few minutes, Professor Kethavar had completely changed his understanding of strength and leadership. The old Velkin was proving that it was never too late to learn and grow. Zix looked around the room at all the students he had scared. For the first time, he really saw how his behavior had affected them. Pip was still sniffling. The Aquarian twins were still pressed together for comfort. Bloom was still curled up defensively. I'm sorry, Zix said quietly. The words came, out rough and uncertain, like he was learning a new language. Pip, I'm sorry I called you weak. You're really smart and I was jealous. Pip's large eyes went wide. Jealous? Of me? You always know the answers to Mr. Martinez's questions, Zix explained. You understand things faster than I do. Instead of being happy for you, I tried to make you feel bad. That was wrong. Zix turned to the Aquarian twins. Coral, Wave, I'm sorry I scared you. You're not cowards for being peaceful. You're wise. My father always says the best diplomats are the ones who choose peace over fighting. The twins exchanged looks of surprise. Slowly, they made their water tank a little bigger, showing they felt safer. Finally, Zix looked at Bloom. And Bloom, you're not slow. You just think carefully about everything before you answer. That's actually really smart. I should try to be more like that. The classroom was completely different now. The fear was gone, replaced by something warmer and softer. Students who had been pressed against their desks were sitting up straighter. Eyes that had been looking down were now looking around with curiosity. Professor Kethavar walked over to Jake. Mr. Martinez, I owe you an apology as well. I thought humans were too emotional to understand real strength. I was very wrong. You have shown more true strength in the last few minutes than I have shown in years of teaching. Jake shook his head. Professor, you don't need to apologize to me. You just did something incredibly brave. You changed your mind when you realized you were wrong. That takes more courage than any battle. Perhaps, Professor Kethvar said, thoughtfully, humans and Velkins could learn from each other. Your people understand kindness in ways we have forgotten. Our people understand honor in ways that might help humans too. I'd like that, Jake said. Maybe we could teach some classes together. The professor's scales brightened to a happy yellow. I would be honored to learn from you, Jake Martinez. Zix raised his hand tentatively. Professor? Mr. Martinez? Could I help too? I want to learn how to be a real leader. Jake smiled. Everyone can learn to be a leader, Zix. It just takes practice and patience. As the students filed out of the classroom that day, something had fundamentally changed on Kepler Station. Word of what happened would spread quickly through the halls and corridors. The idea that strength could come from kindness, that leaders should serve others, that admitting mistakes was brave rather than weak. These human concepts were about to transform how every species on the station thought about power and respect. It had all started with two simple words: say sorry. 6 months had passed since what everyone now called the day the teacher said sorry. News of Professor Kethvar's apology had spread through Kepler Station like wildfire. What started in one classroom had grown into something much bigger. Jake stood in the main observation deck, looking out at the stars. The station felt different now. The hallways were filled with laughter instead of fearful whispers. Students from different species played together during break time. Teachers smiled more often, thinking about how much has changed. Amy Chen, the principal, joined Jake at the window. She carried a datapad with reports from all over the station. It's amazing, Jake said. I never thought one conversation could make such a difference. Amy nodded. The reports from the other teachers are incredible. Professor Zentar from the Zarkian section started allowing students to ask questions without raising their hands first. He says the classroom discussions are much more interesting now. She scrolled through more reports. The Aquarian teachers have stopped making their students compete against each other. Instead, they work together on group projects, and the Floraxian instructors are encouraging faster thinking along with their traditional careful consideration. What about the parents? Jake asked. I was worried they might be upset about the changes. Amy laughed. That's the best part. Ambassador Thexmore, Zix's father, requested a meeting with you last week. He wanted to thank you personally for helping his son become a better leader. Jake remembered that meeting. The tall Velkin diplomat had been formal at first, but his scales had turned warm colors as they talked. Ambassador Thexmore had explained that Zix was now known throughout the diplomatic quarters as a young Velkin who helped other species instead of bullying them. The other Velkin parents are asking Professor Kethvar to teach their children about human-style leadership, Amy continued. They've realized that the old ways might not work in a mixed galactic community. Through the window, Jake could see a group of students working together on a science project in one of the outdoor learning areas. Zix was there, helping little Pip operate a complex device. The Zarkian student was explaining something excitedly while Zix listened with patience and respect. Zix has really changed, Jake observed. All the Velkin cubs have, Amy agreed. They're still proud of their heritage, but now they see strength as something that helps others instead of hurting them. Vex started a club to help new students feel welcome. Kral has been tutoring struggling students in mathematics. A soft chime announced that classes were starting. Jake and Amy walked through the corridors toward their respective work areas. As they passed different classrooms, Jake could hear the sounds of active learning. Students were asking questions, debating ideas, and laughing together. They stopped outside Professor Kethvar's room. Through the open door, Jake could see the Velkin teacher leading a discussion about galactic history. But this lesson was different from the one 6 months ago. Students from all species were participating. The professor was asking for their opinions and listening carefully to their answers. The Battle of Crimson Nebula was won because different species worked together, Professor Kethvar was explaining. The Velkins provided military strength, but the Zarkians provided technical knowledge, and the Aquarians provided diplomatic wisdom. No single species could have won alone. A Floraxian student raised a branch-like hand. Professor, does that mean strength comes from cooperation? Professor Kethavar's scales turned a pleased yellow. Exactly, young Bloom. True strength has always come from bringing different abilities together. Jake smiled as he listened. The old Velkin had become one of the most popular teachers on the station. His classes were always full because students knew they would be treated with respect and kindness. There's something else you should know, Amy said quietly as they continued walking. The Galactic Education Council wants to send observers to study our methods. Other schools are asking how we created such a positive learning environment. Really? Jake was surprised. I just did what seemed right. That's exactly why it worked, Amy replied. You didn't try to impose human culture on everyone else. You just showed them a different way to think about strength and leadership. They reached Jake's classroom where his students were already waiting. The change in the room's atmosphere was remarkable. 6 months ago, this space had been filled with tension and fear. Now it buzzed with excitement and curiosity. Good morning, Mr. Martinez, the students called out together. Jake noticed that Pip no longer sat in the back corner trying to be invisible. The little Zarkian had moved to the front row and was one of the most eager participants in every discussion. Good morning, everyone, Jake replied. Today we're going to learn about Earth history, specifically about times when humans had to learn to work together despite their differences. Zix raised his hand. Mr. Martinez, did humans ever have the same problems we had here? Where some groups thought they were better than others? Unfortunately, yes, Jake said honestly. Humans have made many mistakes throughout our history. We've had wars and conflicts based on thinking that some people were better than others because of how they looked or where they came from. How did you fix it? Asked Coral, one of the Aquarian twins. We're still working on it, Jake admitted. But we learned that diversity makes us stronger, not weaker. When people with different backgrounds and ideas work together, they can solve problems that none of them could solve alone. This led to a rich discussion about cooperation and understanding. Students shared stories from their own cultures about times when working together had led to great achievements. Jake noticed that the Velkin cubs contributed just as much as the other students, but now they were adding to the conversation instead of dominating it. After class, Zix approached Jake's desk. The young Velkin had grown taller over the past months, but more importantly, he carried himself differently. His posture showed confidence without aggression. Mr. Martinez, Zix said, I wanted to tell you something. Yesterday, some new students arrived from my home world. They were acting the way I used to act, trying to scare the other species. What did you do? Jake asked. I told them what you told me, Zix replied proudly. I said that real strength means protecting others, not hurting them. And when they didn't listen, I used my position as the ambassador's son to make them understand that bullying wouldn't be tolerated here. Jake felt a warm glow of pride. How did that work out? They were confused at first, Zix admitted. But then I introduced them to Pip and the others. I showed them how much more fun it is to have friends from different species, instead of just having everyone afraid of you. Now they're all working together on a project about interspecies cooperation. That evening, Jake attended a special ceremony in the main assembly hall. Principal Amy Chen was presenting awards to students who had shown exceptional leadership and kindness over the past semester. The hall was packed with families from dozens of different worlds. Belkan parents sat next to Zarkian families. Aquarian diplomats chatted with Floraxian traders. The diversity that had once been a source of tension was now celebrated as the station's greatest strength. This year, Amy announced to the crowd, we're introducing a new award. The Jake Martinez Award for Compassionate Leadership will be given to students who show that true strength comes from helping others. Jake was surprised to hear his name attached to the award. He hadn't expected that kind of recognition. The first recipient, Amy continued, is Zix, son of Ambassador Thexmore, for his work in helping new students feel welcome, and for organizing the first ever interspecies friendship club. The applause was tremendous as Zix walked to the stage. His scales were bright with pride, but it was a different kind of pride than before. This wasn't the arrogant satisfaction of dominance. This was the joy of someone who had learned to use his strength to help others. As Zix accepted his award, he spoke to the crowd. 6 months ago, I thought being strong meant making others afraid of me. Mr. Martinez and Professor Kethvar taught me that real strength means making others feel safe with me. I want to thank them for showing me how to be a real leader. After the ceremony, Professor Kethvar approached Jake. The old Velkin's scales were a warm golden color that indicated deep contentment. Jake Martinez, he said formally, I have a proposal for you. What kind of proposal? Jake asked. The Velkin Council of Education has asked me to develop a new curriculum about leadership and cooperation. They want to implement it on Velkin worlds throughout the galaxy. I would like you to help me create it. Jake was amazed. You want to teach human leadership concepts to Velkin children? I want to teach universal leadership concepts, Professor Kethvar corrected. Concepts that we learned together from both our cultures. The galaxy is changing, Jake Martinez. Species can no longer live in isolation. We need leaders who can bring different peoples together, not drive them apart. Jake looked around the assembly hall, where families from across the galaxy were celebrating their children's achievements together. 6 months ago, this would have been impossible. Different species had kept to themselves, suspicious and fearful of each other. Now, Velkin cubs were teaching Zarkian children traditional war games, but as cooperative competitions instead of dominance displays.